single choice can quiet an entire world. Elara's fingers close around a moon-blessed river stone, cool and smooth, her first deliberate step into a legend. She is a young sound weaver, and the forest around her is holding its breath. This is not a simple lullaby she must craft. Failure is not an option, for failure means the spread of the Great Unrest, a creeping silence that steals sleep from every living thing. Her own quiet desperation to prove her worth is now the only fuel she has to heal the land. By the end of this journey, you will understand the hidden architecture of true calm, the blueprints for crafting peace from chaos. Wherever you are listening from, and whatever the hour is there, I hope this finds you in a moment of quiet. What must it feel like to hold the power to sing the world to sleep? The rustle of leaves beneath Elara's feet is the only sound she dares to make. Inside the whispering grove, the air itself feels ancient, thick with a harmony so profound it hums against her skin. This is the heart of the forest, the wellspring from which all natural calm flows, or at least it used to be. Now the harmony is faint, a fading echo. With a deep breath, Elara begins her work. She focuses her will, her hands moving in the intricate patterns she has practiced for years. She tries to weave the most fundamental of soundscapes, the gentle rustle of autumn leaves and the soft, distant chime of wind bells. The sounds emerge from her fingertips, technically correct, but they hang in the air like painted scenery. They are flat, devoid of life. There is no resonance, no sense that they belong to this sacred place. A young fawn, nestled at the base of an ancient oak, flinches at the artificial noise, its eyes wide with alarm instead of serenity. The grove itself seems to pull away from her creation. The failure is a physical blow. It is not just that her skill is insufficient. It is that the grove, the very source of the magic she seeks to emulate, is actively rejecting her offering. The Great Unrest is not a passive emptiness. It is a force that fights back against healing. Despair washes over her, cold and sharp. She could push harder, pour more of her own energy into the weave, forcing the sounds to take hold. But something stops her. The memory of the startled fawn, the subtle recoil of the ancient trees. It all speaks a truth she can no longer ignore. This is not about what she can give. It is about what the grove needs, so she lets the failed soundscape dissolve into silence. She closes her eyes and does the one thing her frantic ambition had prevented her from doing. She simply listens. She listens not for a sound to copy, but for the grove's own faint, fading heartbeat. This quiet surrender, this humbling admission of her own inadequacy, is the first truly wise choice she has made. It forces her to acknowledge that the old ways, the techniques she has mastered, are not enough. The answer lies not in her own skill, but in understanding a deeper resonance, a secret known only to the grove's forgotten guardians. Her path is now clear, leading away from the heart of the forest and toward the solitary hut of a mentor everyone else believes has vanished for good. The path to Lyra's cave was a scar across the mountain, a trail only remembered by the wind and the most desperate of seekers. Inside, the air was cool and still, smelling of damp stone and dried herbs. The master sound weaver herself was a figure of sharp angles and deeper silences, her eyes holding a weary light as she regarded the young apprentice who had disturbed her solitude. Elara's plea to learn the true art of calming soundscapes was met not with enthusiasm, but with a quiet, dismissive sigh. "You are all noise and need," Lyra stated, her voice a soft rasp like stones, shifting deep underground. "You seek to shout over the Great Unrest, and in doing so, you only add to the cacophony." To prove her point, Lyra did not weave a grand symphony. She simply lifted a hand toward the mouth of the cave, where a fat, buzzing hornet was angrily investigating a crack in the rock. Elara expected a counter sound, a wave of force to drive the insect away. Instead, Lyra's fingers traced patterns so faint they barely disturbed the dust motes, dancing in a sunbeam. She did not fight the buzz, she wove around it. She created a soundscape so subtle it was felt more than heard, a gentle pressure that mimicked the deepest, most secure part of a hive. The hornet's aggressive drone softened, its flight pattern becoming a lazy, looping circle. Then, impossibly, it simply stopped, landing on the stone wall and tucking its legs beneath its body, falling into a profound and instant sleep. The lesson was a quiet earthquake in Elara's mind. Her own weavings in the grove had been loud and forceful attempts to impose peace. Lyra's art was an act of profound empathy, of understanding the listener's inner state so completely that the soundscape became an invitation to rest, not a command. True calm requires immense control, Lyra explained, watching the sleeping hornet. It is not about power, but about precision. You must become a student of desire, learning what the soul secretly craves. But Lyra remained unconvinced of Elara's readiness. She believed the new generation sought quick fixes, lacking the patience to listen to the world's whispers. Faced with this rejection, Elara made a vow. She would not weave a single sound. She would spend an entire day and night in the cave in absolute silence, doing nothing but observing. It was a promise born of her failure in the grove, a recognition that her greatest flaw was not a lack of skill, but a failure to listen. Intrigued by this spark of humility, Lyra agreed to a single lesson, but her warning was grave. "The first principle is layering," she said, "but layer incorrectly, with sounds that clash or rhythms that fight, and you will not create peace. You will brew a potion of mental chaos, a dissonance that can shatter a fragile mind." The stakes of Elara's education were no longer just about saving the forest, but about understanding the responsibility that comes with such power. And so her first lesson began not with creation, but with deconstruction. Lyra instructed her to close her eyes and listen, not to the sounds, but to the shape of the silence between them. The only sound in the cave was the faint, rhythmic tap of Elara's finger against a small, hollowed-out gourd. For 7 days, this had been her entire world. Lyra had called it the foundational layer, the bedrock upon which all tranquility is built. It was a simple, steady beat, slower than a walking pace, meant to mimic the most primal rhythm of all, a resting heartbeat. Elara's own heart often raced with frustration, her mind screaming for the intricate melodies and harmonies she had trained for. The simplicity felt like a cage. Her first attempts were rushed, the beat skittering like a frightened animal. Lyra would simply shake her head, her silence more crushing than any criticism. "A rhythm too fast," she had explained, "does not invite calm. It triggers an ancient alarm, telling the listener's body that something is wrong, that it must be ready to flee." A beat too slow, however, feels unnatural, a dragging emptiness that can feel lonely or even sinister. The goal was a pace that felt like a safe, steady companion, a rhythmic anchor in the quiet. The turning point came with a sparrow that had flown into the cave, its tiny body trembling with panic as it beat its wings against the stone ceiling. Elara, pushing her own impatience aside, focused everything on the gourd. She closed her eyes and found the rhythm not in her hands, but in her own breath, letting each exhale guide the gentle tap. She did not play for the cave, or for Lyra, or even for herself. She played for the bird. The frantic fluttering began to slow, matching the pace of her drum. Then the sparrow simply settled on a rocky ledge, its head tucking under its wing, falling into a peaceful sleep. It was a tiny victory, but in that moment, Elara understood the immense power of restraint. The foundation was not a constraint on her creativity. It was the very thing that made creativity safe. She made a choice then, a decision that felt like a sacrifice. She would master this single, boring layer, no matter how long it took. She would sacrifice the immediate gratification of complex sound for the profound strength of simple stability. Lyra watched this commitment, and for the first time, a flicker of approval showed in her eyes. She approached Elara as she practiced. "You have built a solid floor," she said, her voice low. "But a floor alone is not a home. Now we give it a voice. A flawed foundation," she warned, "is like building a house on cracked stone. You can decorate it with the most beautiful melodies in the world, but the entire structure will be unstable. When it collapses, it will not just fail to soothe. The dissonance between a shaky rhythm and a floating melody can create a deep, unsettling confusion in the mind, a sense that nothing is trustworthy. It can shatter the very piece you are trying to build. Mastery, therefore, was not about pride. It was a moral imperative. With a steady heartbeat now an unshakable part of her, Elara was ready to learn about the melodic layers, the emotional soul of the soundscape that would give the grove its song back. The crystal bowl sang with a cold, sharp clarity that felt out of place in the earthy cave. Elara's hands trembled slightly as she struck the first one, a high, pure note meant to be a gentle star in the soundscape's sky. She tried to layer it over the steady, patient heartbeat of her gourd drum, but the star did not twinkle, it shrieked. The melody she attempted was a simple, descending pattern, something she had used 100 times before. Yet here, against the foundation she had worked so hard to build, it sounded like an argument. The notes arrived at the wrong moments, stepping on the rhythm instead of dancing with it. The resulting dissonance was a physical sensation, a sour twist in the air that made Lyra, watching from the shadows, visibly wince and turn her head away. Frustration boiled inside Elara. She was an artist, trained to paint with sound, and these rigid rules felt like being told to paint only with shades of gray. The desire to break free, to let a beautiful, complex melody soar, was almost overwhelming. It felt like her own creativity was being stifled, her musical voice silenced in the name of a boring, predictable calm. She tried again, forcing the melody to fit, bending the rhythm to accommodate a flourish she particularly loved. The result was even worse, a jangling mess that made the sleeping sparrow on the ledge stir uneasily. Then she remembered the hornet. Lyra had not fought the buzz, she had welcomed it. Elara closed her eyes, letting her frustration drain away with a long, slow breath. She made a conscious decision. a surrender that felt more like a discovery. Instead of forcing her preconceived melody onto the rhythm, she would let the rhythm guide the melody. She focused entirely on the deep, reassuring thump of the gourd, feeling its pulse in her bones. She waited, listening for the spaces between the beats, the natural breath of the foundation. And in those quiet spaces, she allowed a single, soft chime from a bowl to ring out. It was not a note she had planned. It was an answer to the rhythm's call. The sound hung in the air, perfectly complementary, a gentle sigh of agreement. Lyra stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "You have felt the danger," she said. A melody is not just a sequence of notes. It is a key that can unlock forgotten rooms in the mind. A cheerful tune might accidentally resonate with a memory of a lost, joyful day, bringing not comfort, but a sharp, painful longing. A melancholic air might, for another, feel like a sympathetic friend, validating a hidden sadness and finally allowing it to rest. The crafter of the soundscape does not control these unlocked doors. They can only strive for a harmonic neutrality, a gentle guidance that avoids sharp emotional turns. Your job is not to tell a story with the melody, but to provide a blank, soothing page upon which the listener's own mind can rest. The risk of getting it wrong is not failure, but unintentional harm. This understanding settled over Elara like a heavy cloak. The power she sought was far more profound and delicate than she had ever imagined. But with this new humility came a flicker of mastery. As she continued, the melody began to weave itself naturally around the rhythm, no longer a separate entity, but an organic extension of it. The two layers merged into a single, coherent whole, a simple yet profound harmony that felt both stable and gently uplifting. Lyra gave a slow, single nod. "The foundation is set, and the soul has found its voice," she murmured, "but a world with only a heartbeat and a song is an empty concert hall. Now we must fill the air itself. We must learn the art of the unseen." The air inside the cave now held a steady rhythm and a gentle melody, a structure that felt complete yet strangely hollow. Lyra gestured to the space around them. "You have built the walls and the roof of your sanctuary, but it is an empty house. True comfort lies in the feeling of life just beyond the walls, the proof that the world continues safely while you rest. This is the texture of silence, the art of the ambient. Elara's task was to learn the difference between a void and a space. A true void, an absolute silence, can feel like abandonment, triggering a primal alertness. But a space filled with gentle, non-threatening sounds tells the subconscious mind that all is well, that the watch is being kept by the world itself. She began by trying to weave the obvious choices, the faint crackle of a dying fire and the soft hum of distant crickets, but Lyra stopped her immediately. "Those are not sounds to you, they are concepts. You are painting with labels, not with essence. You have not yet learned to listen." The conflict was no longer about technical skill, but about ethics and understanding. To simply record a sound and play it back was a kind of theft, an empty imitation that the grove would reject just as it had her first attempt. A true sound weaver does not steal a sound's voice. She learns its soul so she can sing its song from memory. The only path forward was immersion. As dusk painted the sky in shades of violet and deep blue, Elara found herself at the edge of the Glimmerwaiter Mire, a bioluminescent swamp that was said to hold the most intricate nighttime chorus in the entire realm. She waded in slowly, the cool water soaking her leggings, and she made a vow of silence, not to the cave, but to the swamp itself. She would not weave, she would only receive. At first, the night seemed to offer exactly what she sought. There was the gentle plip of a water droplet falling from a leaf, the subtle swish of reeds in a faint breeze, the layered croaking of frogs that created a complex, rhythmic pattern. But as her ears adjusted, she heard the truth beneath the surface. The frogs' croaks were not a contented conversation, but a frantic, overlapping warning. The buzz of insects had a sharp, anxious edge. The water itself seemed to lap at the shore with a nervous energy. The Great Unrest was here, too, twisting the swamp's natural lullaby into a soundtrack of low-grade fear. This was not a collection of peaceful sounds to be copied. It was a patient in need of healing. Her mission shifted in that moment. She was not here to harvest components for a spell. She was here to diagnose, to understand the quality of the disharmony, so she could one day help restore the harmony. She listened past the fear, searching for the pure, original essence of each sound, the peaceful state it was meant to embody. She discovered that the texture of true safety was not in the loudest sounds, but in the quietest ones, the ones that created a soft, embracing blanket of presence. After a night of profound listening, she returned to Lyra's cave, her mind humming with the pure, undistorted textures of a world she now heard with new ears. She had collected not recordings, but understandings. She finally knew the soul of the ambient. Lyra saw the change in her eyes and nodded slowly. "You have gathered the cloth," she said. "Now we must learn the final cut, the psychological thread that will weave all these layers into a spell that can truly heal a mind." Lyra's next lesson began not with sound, but with a question that settled in the caves, quiet like a stone in deep water. What is the difference between a command and an invitation? You have built a sanctuary with rhythm, melody, and texture, but the mind may still cling to its worries, barring its own door. The final layer does not speak to the ears, it speaks to the soul. It is called suggestion. Elara watched, her own breath held, as Lyra's hands moved with a new, almost imperceptible delicacy. She did not add a new sound, but rather wove a whisper into the existing tapestry, a subliminal thread of intention, so subtle it was felt as a sudden shift in the air's pressure, a gentle nudge against the spirit. Lyra directed this invisible thread not at the cave, but directly at Elara. The effect was not dramatic, but it was absolute. A deep, cold knot of anxiety that Elara had carried for years, a constant background dread about failing her family and her craft, simply dissolved. It did not fade or retreat. It vanished as if it had never existed, leaving behind a warmth and a sense of safety, so profound it brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She had not even been fully aware of the weight until it was gone. The power was terrifying in its gentleness. This was not persuasion, it was alteration. The ethical weight of it crashed down upon her. Such a tool, in the wrong hands, could make a person believe anything, feel anything. It could twist love from obligation, or manufacture contentment in a cage. It was not a brush for painting calm. It was a sculptor's chisel for the mind itself. The conflict was immediate and internal. The desire to wield this power was immense, but the fear of its potential for harm was greater. A soundscape, crafted with suggestion, was no longer just art. It was a direct intervention into the deepest, most private spaces of another being. Misuse would not simply fail to soothe, it could rewrite a person's inner world, leaving them permanently unmoored from their own authentic feelings. Faced with this staggering responsibility, Elara made a choice that would define her path. She knelt before Lyra, not in submission, but in solemn vow. "I swear," she said, her voice steady with a newfound gravity, "to use this layer only as a key for locks I did not create, and only to open doors toward peace. I will be a gardener, never a conqueror of the mind." Lyra's stern expression softened into something resembling respect. The oath was accepted. With it, Elara's apprenticeship was complete. She was now a fledgling master, her tools honed and her purpose clear. But theory is one thing, and practice another. Her final test would not be a demonstration in the safety of the cave. Lyra spoke of a creature that lived high on the wind-scoured peaks, a majestic storm eagle whose fierce, racing mind had not known a moment's rest since it first learned to fly. If Elara could sing even this wild heart to sleep, she would be ready to face the silence of the Whispering Grove. The badger's claws tore at the gnarled roots of the Whispering Grove with a frantic, desperate energy. This was no ordinary creature. He was a patriarch, a guardian of the earth, now driven mad by a sleeplessness so profound it had twisted his natural instinct to burrow into a mindless act of destruction. Elara watched from the shadows, her heart aching. This was her first real test since leaving Lyra's cave, and the stakes were terrifyingly high. If the badger continued, he would undermine the very heart of the forest, accelerating the Great Unrest he was himself a victim of. She had to craft a soundscape not for a place, but for a single, tormented soul. She began as Lyra had taught her, building the foundation. She wove a slow, steady heartbeat rhythm, the universal signal for rest. But the badger's own heart was a wild, panicked drumbeat that overpowered her careful construction. She added a melody, not a song, but the gentle, rhythmic sound of claws digging through soft, yielding earth, an activity that should bring him comfort. She layered in the ambient sounds of a deep, safe burrow, the faint echo of a protected space. Finally, she threaded through a suggestion of profound security, a feeling that the earth itself was holding him safe. But his agitation was a tangible force, a storm of dissonance that actively shredded her weave. Each frantic scratch was a counterspell, unraveling her peace. Her carefully planned soundscape was failing. The badger was too lost in his own turmoil to accept an external calm. In that moment of impending failure, Elara made a critical decision. She abandoned her preset design and chose to listen, truly listen, to the badger's chaos. Instead of fighting his frantic heartbeat, she would invite it in. She shifted her focus, weaving a new rhythmic layer that perfectly mirrored the badger's own racing pulse. For a few agonizing seconds, the soundscape held two conflicting heartbeats, her calm one and his terrified one. Then, with immense concentration, she began the delicate work of improvisation. She slowly, imperceptibly, began to slow the rhythm she was weaving, guiding the badger's heartbeat to follow, like a parent gently slowing the pace of a frightened child's run until it becomes a walk. She matched his terror, then led him out of it. The melody of digging softened from a frantic scramble to a contented, sleepy motion. The suggestion of security now found a foothold in a mind that was finally, for the first time in weeks, listening. The change was not sudden, but a gradual surrender. The badger's furious digging slowed to a pawing motion, then to a gentle shuffle. His eyes, once wide with a feral energy, grew heavy. He curled into a ball among the very roots he had been attacking, his body sinking into the earth with a deep, shuddering sigh. A profound, natural sleep took him. The silence that followed was not empty, but full. It was the sound of success, of a small piece of the world healed. Elara felt a surge of triumph, a validation of all she had learned. But as the first light of dawn filtered through the canopy, a new sound reached her ears, one that chilled her blood. It was not the sound of chaos, but of an immense, terrifying order. It was the rhythmic, marching beat of 1,000 metallic wings. Her test with a single creature was over. The grove's true trial was now beginning. The rhythmic beat of 1,000 metallic wings did not come from the sky, but from a single, sealed scroll delivered by a council messenger. The summons was brief and cold. Elara was to present herself before the Elder Council of Sound Weavers at the next full moon. Her unsanctioned apprenticeship under the exiled Lyra had not gone unnoticed. The message made it clear this was not an invitation, but a trial. Her future, and the future of the methods she had learned, hung in the balance. For so long, acceptance by the council had been her deepest wish. To walk the polished stone halls of the Weaver's Spire, to be recognized by the masters who upheld centuries of tradition, that was the validation she had craved. Now, that dream felt like a gilded cage. The council saw Lyra's techniques, especially the use of suggestion, as a dangerous perversion of their art. They believed true soundscapes should be beautiful external compositions, not internal interventions. To them, Lyra was a rogue element, and Elara was her misguided disciple. The conflict tore at her. Loyalty to Lyra, to the woman who had shown her the true, profound power of empathetic sound, was a fierce fire in her heart. Yet, the longing for a place in the community she had trained her whole life to join was a deep, persistent ache. She stood at a crossroads between the rigid, safe path of tradition and the untested, perilous path of innovation. The council offered belonging, but only if she denied the very truths that had allowed her to heal the badger. Lyra offered truth, but only at the cost of permanent isolation. In the quiet of her preparation, Elara made her choice. She would not hide Lyra's teachings. She would demonstrate the full blueprints for calm, from the foundational rhythm to the subtle thread of suggestion. It was a tremendous risk. By openly using a forbidden technique, she would not only confirm their fears about her, but she would also irrevocably tie her fate to Lyra's. Defiance could see them both cast out forever, two voices against the growing silence of the Great Unrest. As she began to plan her demonstration, a new realization dawned, one that filled her with a fresh kind of fear. Every lesson with Lyra, every success, had been focused on a single listener, a hornet, a sparrow, a badger. But the council was not one mind. It was a gathering of individuals, each with their own hidden anxieties, prideful thoughts, and stubborn beliefs. She could not craft one soundscape for a monolithic group. To succeed, she would have to weave a tapestry of calm that could hold a dozen different hearts at once, a symphony of serenity for a fractured choir. The true test would be harmonizing not sounds, but souls. The polished stone of the amphitheater felt cold beneath Elara's feet, a stark contrast to the warm, living earth of the grove. Before her, the elder council sat in a silent, imposing semicircle, their faces carved from the same unforgiving stone. They were masters of the grand symphony, creators of soundscapes that could fill entire valleys with majestic, sweeping beauty. Her task was to convince them that a whisper could be mightier than a chorus. Taking a steadying breath, she began to weave. Her fingers moved, not with the dramatic flourishes they expected, but with the quiet precision Lyra had taught her. First, the foundation, a deep, resonant pulse, slower than a resting heartbeat, bloomed from a large, hide-covered drum. It was not a sound to be heard, but a vibration to be felt, a bedrock of stability laid at their feet. The council's silence was not passive. It was a disciplined, collective force, a wall of quiet judgment that actively pushed back against her creation. Her soundscape lapped against this invisible barrier, unable to penetrate. She added the melodic layer, the gentle chime of river-smooth stones, and the soft sigh of a distant flute. It was a melody that asked no questions and told no stories, a simple offering of peace. She watched their faces, searching for any crack in their stern composure. One elder, a woman with eyes like chips of flint, shifted ever so slightly. The rigid line of her shoulders eased a fraction. Elara poured her empathy into the weave, focusing not on controlling them, but on understanding the weight of their responsibility, the fatigue that must lie beneath their robes of office. Her soundscape became an acknowledgement, a shared sigh for the burdens they all carried. The tension in the air was a palpable battle between her gentle pressure and their collective will. Her magic strained, not from brute force, but from the immense effort of maintaining such delicate, persistent calm against their resistance. Then came the moment of ultimate choice. The suggestion layer, the subtle thread that could bypass their conscious minds and plant a feeling of acceptance directly in their souls, hovered at the edge of her awareness. It was the tool that would guarantee her victory, the very technique they feared most. She made her decision in a heartbeat. She would not use it. To win their trust with a hidden manipulation would be the deepest betrayal of Lyra's teachings. She had to prove that the beauty and truth of the method itself were enough. She let the suggestion dissipate, choosing to stand vulnerable before them, her art laid bare. The soundscape now held only its 3 pure layers, an honest and open-handed gift. And then the wall broke. The flint-eyed elder closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. Another let out a soft, shuddering breath he seemed to have been holding for years. The collective silence of the council transformed from a shield into a receptive quiet, their disciplined magic relaxing as they finally allowed her weave to settle over them. Their stern expressions softened into something akin to wonder, just as the head of the council opened his mouth to speak. A sharp, pained cry echoed from the direction of the whispering grove, shattering the fragile peace. The serene quiet of the amphitheater shattered like glass, a wave of pure silence, thick and heavy as a burial shroud, rolled over the assembled council. But this was not a peaceful quiet. It was the Great Unrest itself, given form, a visible distortion in the air that carried the scent of ozone and cold stone. It did not bring stillness, it brought chaos. The calm Elara had so carefully woven was torn to shreds in an instant. Elders who had commanded sound for decades cried out, clutching their heads as their own disciplined minds were flooded with a primal, unreasoning fear. One master's hands fluttered uselessly, his attempts to weave a counter-harmony dissolving into dissonant scrapes. The unrest had found its target, and it was not just the grove anymore. It was the very heart of their order. Elara's own breath caught in her throat, a cold spike of terror threatening to paralyze her. The council's control was gone, replaced by the raw evidence of the threat they had refused to fully acknowledge. This was no creeping emptiness. It was an intelligent, aggressive force that sought to silence all harmony permanently. In that split second, a single, clear thought cut through the panic. She could not fight this alone. Her soundscape, built for persuasion, was utterly inadequate for a war. Her eyes met Lyra's across the chaotic amphitheater. No words were spoken, but a pact was forged in a single glance. Elara made her choice. Instead of reinforcing her own fragile weave, she opened it, tearing down the invisible walls around her creation. She reached out with her will, not to dominate, but to invite. She linked the core of her soundscape, the steady heartbeat and the gentle melody, to the faint, stubborn ember of Lyra's own power. It was like connecting two streams into a river. The combined flow was instantly stronger, a flickering bastion of calm in the raging storm of silence. Then she did something even more daring. She extended the connection toward the panicked council members. It was not a takeover, but an offering. She was asking them to join their strength to hers, to trust the very methods they had just condemned. Some recoiled, their pride and fear too great, but the flint-eyed elder, who had moments ago shed a tear of relief, seized the thread. Her power, seasoned and deep, flowed into the unified weave. Another elder followed, then another. Their individual styles were different, a clash of traditions and tastes, but Elara did not try to homogenize them. She became a conductor, allowing the deep, resonant chords of the council to bolster her foundational rhythm, while their complex harmonies wove around her simple melody, enriching it without overpowering it. The unified soundscape swelled, no longer a delicate invitation, but a solid shield of audible light. The wave of unrest crashed against it, the silent pressure testing every seam. This was no longer a test of skill or a debate of philosophies. It was a battle for the soul of the forest, a fight to determine whether the world would succumb to a permanent, waking nightmare. The stakes were now immediate and terrifyingly physical. Every living thing in the vicinity, from the smallest insect to the oldest tree, felt the conflict as a tremor in their very being, their chance for future peace hanging in the balance. The shield held, but it trembled under the assault, a fragile dam against an ocean of despair. The soundscape shield shimmered in the air, a fragile dome of woven harmony, holding back a tide of pure dissonance. Elara felt the strain in every fiber of her being, a deep, draining ache, as if she were physically holding up the sky. To her left, Lyra's power was a steady, ancient river, but even that current was beginning to falter. To her right, the council elders contributed their own threads, a brilliant but chaotic tapestry of sound that Elara had to constantly weave together. She was the conductor of a desperate orchestra, her focus split a dozen ways, listening for the faintest crack in their collective defense. The unrest was not a mindless force. It tested their shield like a predator, probing for weakness, shifting from a low, soul-chilling hum to a sudden, shrieking assault that threatened to shatter their concentration. Each weaver battled their own internal storm. Elara saw the fear in their eyes, the flicker of doubt that threatened to unravel their part of the weave. Her role was no longer just about sound. It was about morale, about sending pulses of calm, reassurance through the magical network they shared, reinforcing their courage even as her own threatened to fail. The shield was holding, but it was a funnel draining their life force. They were a small campfire, trying to hold back an Arctic night. The unrest felt endless, an ocean of silence against their thimble of song. They could not win a war of attrition. A defensive stance was a slow death sentence. In a fleeting moment of clarity between waves of pressure, Elara understood the terrible truth. They were fighting a symptom. The shield protected the grove, but it did nothing to heal the wound from which the unrest bled. To truly win, they would have to stop fighting the storm and instead calm the sea. It was a terrifying pivot. Lowering their defense, even for a moment, could invite annihilation, but maintaining it guaranteed eventual collapse. She made the choice, sending her intention through the weave, not as a command, but as a plea. They had to redirect their energy, to transform their shield from a wall into a bridge. The shield of sound was a fortress, but Elara knew its walls were also a cage. She closed her eyes, pushing her awareness not against the storm, but into it, letting her perception slip through a fragile seam in their weave. What she found on the other side was not a monstrous enemy. It was a symphony of suffering. The Great Unrest was a feedback loop, a terrified echo chamber where every sleepless creature's fear was amplified and reflected back, growing stronger with each pass. And at the very center of this psychic hurricane was the source, a single, ancient heart tree, the first and oldest guardian of the Whispering Grove. Its roots were the forest's nervous system, and they were screaming in a silent, perpetual agony of insomnia. They had been fighting a fever while the infection raged untreated. This truth landed in the council's mind like a lightning strike. The debate was immediate and fractured. Destroy the source, several elders shouted. Sever the corrupted root to save the body of the forest. It is the only logical way. Their fear demanded a final, violent solution. But Elara saw the tree for what it was, a patient, not a poison. You cannot fight pain with a sword, she argued, her voice cutting through the panic. This being is not attacking us. It is crying out. To destroy it would be to murder the soul we are sworn to protect. The conflict was no longer about magic, but about medicine, a choice between amputation and healing. Her decision formed with a terrifying clarity. The shield was a temporary measure, a bandage on a gushing wound. Someone had to reach the heart tree itself, to apply the blueprints for calm directly to the source of the pain. It meant stepping out from their collective protection and walking alone into the heart of the silencing storm. It was a mission that sounded like suicide. Lyra met her gaze, and in her mentor's weary eyes, Elara saw not fear, but a grim pride. The council, shaken by her revelation, understood the necessity. They would not follow her, but they would give her a chance. With a final, concerted effort, they wove all their remaining power into a single, concentrated lance of harmony, a bridge of sound aimed directly at the distant heart tree. Taking a breath that felt like her last, Elara stepped through the shimmering shield and into the screaming silence. Every step into the grove was like wading through solid fear. Elara moved forward inside a fragile bubble of her own making, a personal sanctuary woven from the steady drumbeat and the softest chime. Outside this thin sphere, the world was a nightmare of silent screams. Trees twisted into agonized shapes, their branches clawing at a sky drained of all sound. The air itself was thick with a psychic static that translated in her mind as pure, undiluted despair. Her progress was not measured in distance, but in the painful erosion of her will. Each footfall required a conscious act of defiance against a pressure that wanted to crush her into the earth. The unrest did not attack with claws or teeth. It weaponized her own mind. A whisper slithered through her defenses, sounding exactly like Lyra's voice. You are a child playing with forces you cannot comprehend. You will die here, and your failure will be the final note in this forest song. Another thought, cold and sharp as an icicle, pierced her concentration. The council was right. This is a madness. Turn back before it is too late. Her personal soundscape flickered, the rhythm stuttering as a wave of doubt washed over her. The temptation to reinforce the bubble, to make it an impenetrable shield against the horror, was overwhelming, but that was the trap. To block out the pain entirely would be to reject the very truth she had come to heal. She made a choice that felt like spiritual suicide. Instead of fighting the whispers, she opened a tiny seam in her weave. She allowed a thread of the surrounding agony to enter her sanctuary. The sound was a psychic wound, a shriek of existential loneliness. For a moment, it threatened to unravel her completely. But then, she began the delicate, agonizing work of transformation. She did not try to silence the scream. She wrapped it in her foundational rhythm, slowing its frantic pulse. She layered it with a melody of deep empathy, a sound that said, "I hear you. I feel your pain." She understood that this terrible noise was not an attack. It was a cry for help, amplified 1,000-fold by the heart tree's suffering. By accepting it, she was acknowledging its reality, and in that acknowledgement lay the first step toward healing. This act of integration cost her dearly. Each painful sound she welcomed and soothed drained a little more of her life force. The heart tree, a dark silhouette in the distance, seemed to recede with every advancing step. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. The bubble grew thinner, the light within it dimming. The weight of the entire forest's insomnia pressed down on her, and the inevitability of her failure became a cold certainty. Her soundscape sputtered, the rhythm faltering for a final time. As the darkness rushed in to claim her, she lifted her head, and there it was. Not a monster, but a weeping willow of impossible size, its branches hanging like curtains of sorrow, and from its core emanated the raw, unfiltered pain of a world that had forgotten how to sleep. The weeping willow stood as a monument to collective suffering, its branches a cascading veil of silver grief. Each leaf was not a leaf at all, but a shimmering fragment of a lost dream, a whispered worry, a sorrow that had never found release. The tree was not the source of the poison. It was the forest's overwhelmed filter, having drank from a well of insomnia for centuries until it could hold no more. Its agony was a physical force, a windless storm that tore at the edges of Elara's fragile sanctuary. The closer she stepped, the more her own thoughts began to fray. threatening to unravel into the same silent scream that echoed from the ancient bark. Her protective bubble, the very blueprint for calm she had built her hope upon, was now a barrier to the truth. To heal this, she could not observe from a safe distance. She had to become the wound. With a final, shuddering breath, she let the soundscape around her dissolve. The steady rhythm vanished. The gentle melody fell silent. She opened her arms and her mind, offering no defense against the torrent of sorrow. The impact was absolute. It was not a single voice, but a chorus of millions, the accumulated sleeplessness of every creature, every root, every stone in the forest. She felt the frantic worry of a mother fox for her kits, the deep loneliness of an old stag, the unresolved anger of 1,000 petty arguments, the existential dread of the trees themselves. It was an ocean of psychic noise, and she was a single, sinking stone. Her sense of self began to dissolve in the current. The boundary between Elara and the tree, between the healer and the patient, blurred and then vanished. She was no longer standing before the heart tree. She was inside it, her consciousness merging with its ancient, overloaded core. The task was no longer to build a soundscape for the tree, but to compose one from within it, using the very substance of its pain as her instrument. She had to find a harmony inside the chaos itself. Inside the tree's ancient consciousness, Elara found no monster, only a symphony of exhaustion. She did not fight the cacophony. She began to listen for its rhythm, for the deep, slow pulse of the earth that still beat, however faintly, beneath the screams. This was her first and most vital layer, the foundation. She wove it not as a sound from outside, but as a memory from within, reminding the tree's spirit of the patient, timeless heartbeat of the planet it was rooted in. It was a grounding, a return to the most fundamental stability. Next came the melody, but it was not a tune she invented. It was the tree's own lost language. She sang back to it, the rustle of its own leaves in a forgotten spring breeze, the gentle percussion of rain on a million leaves, the soft creak of healthy growth. She was not imposing a foreign song, but reminding the tree of its own voice, a voice it had not used in centuries. She layered in textures of dappled sunlight warming ancient bark, of cool night air settling over deep roots. These were not additions, but restorations. The tree's resistance was not an attack, but a terrified clinging. Its pain had become its identity, a familiar state that felt safer than the terrifying vulnerability of peace. To accept the lullaby was to relinquish control, to trust that the world would not collapse if it finally rested. The offer of calm felt like a precipice. It fought back with every weapon it had, flooding Elara with echoes of every failure, every creature it had failed to protect, every season of drought and blight. The weight of this sorrow was a physical force crushing her from the inside. She could feel her own spirit thinning, stretched to the breaking point between the tree's despair and her own fading hope. She was not just battling the tree, she was battling the inertia of suffering itself. In this moment of shared extremity, Elara made her final, most delicate choice. She introduced the suggestion layer, but she was wise enough not to suggest sleep. Sleep was the destination, but the path was blocked by fear. Instead, she wove a thread of pure permission. It was a feeling, not a command, a gentle assurance that it was allowed to let go, that the forest, strengthened by the unified council and by her own sacrifice, was now strong enough to hold the watch. That it could trust the world to carry on without its constant, agonizing vigilance. She offered it the chance to be a tree again, not a guardian, to simply exist in the peace of its own nature. The stakes were absolute. The tree's fate and her own were now a single, intertwined thread. If the ancient spirit accepted this invitation, the healing would ripple outward through its roots, calming the entire forest and breaking the cycle of the Great Unrest. But if it rejected her, if it chose the safety of its familiar agony, the backlash would not merely kill her, it would extinguish her essence, and the resulting wave of despair would be so potent, it would silence the council's song forever, plunging the world into a permanent, waking night. The struggle was a silent war, fought in the space between heartbeats. Then, a single, calm note, clear and pure as a drop of morning dew, broke through the whispers of sorrow. It was the tree's own sound, a note of acceptance, the first sign of hope. The single, clear note from the heart tree did not fade, it grew, swelling into a chord of such profound relief that it became a physical force. A visible wave of soft, silver light pulsed outward from the ancient willow, washing over the whispering grove like a gentle tide. Where it passed, the nightmare landscape transformed. The oppressive gray lifted, replaced by the deep, vibrant greens of healthy leaves and the rich browns of fertile earth. Trees that had been twisted into agonized shapes slowly relaxed, their branches settling into natural, graceful arcs. The aggressive, screaming silence shattered, replaced by a deep, natural quiet, the kind filled with the soft, contented sounds of a world at rest. Inside the tree's consciousness, Elara felt the shift not as a victory, but as a shared exhalation. The tree's spirit, so long braced against an endless storm, finally unclenched. A deep, shuddering sigh passed through its entire being, a catharsis that was both physical and spiritual. The temptation for Elara was to disconnect, to retreat to the safety of her own mind and simply observe the healing. But she made a conscious choice to remain, to be an anchor in this moment of vulnerable transition. Peace was an unfamiliar, almost frightening sensation for the ancient guardian. Elara gently guided it, reinforcing the lullaby, assuring it that this unfamiliar quiet was not a new kind of emptiness, but the fertile ground from which new dreams could grow. She stayed until the tree's consciousness settled into a rhythm as old as time itself, the slow, steady breath of true, restorative sleep. The Cascade of Calm did not stop at the grove's edge. It flowed up the mountain path, a wave of serenity that reached the stone amphitheater. The council members, still braced for a final, catastrophic assault, felt the change instantly. The crushing pressure of the Great Unrest vanished, not with a bang, but with a whisper. The terrifying silence was replaced by a gentle, natural evening hush. The unified shield of sound, now unnecessary, flickered and dissolved as they stared in awe at the transformed forest below. The flint-eyed elder slowly lowered her hands, her face a mask of stunned reverence. The proof was undeniable, written in the very colors of the world. Elara's blueprints had not just quieted a single creature, they had healed an ecosystem. Yet as the wave of calm receded, leaving behind a world washed clean, a new and unsettling quiet settled over the council. The immediate threat was gone, but the silence that remained was filled with a daunting question. What do you do after you have saved the world? The path back through the whispering grove felt like walking through a different world. The air itself was a gentle caress, rich with the scent of damp earth and blooming night flowers. Every rustle of a leaf was a contented sigh, every distant call of an owl a lullaby for the sleeping forest. Elara moved slowly, her body a hollow vessel of exhaustion, yet her spirit felt luminous. She did not walk in triumph, but in a state of profound reverence for the quiet she had helped restore. As she emerged into the amphitheater, the silence that greeted her was not the tense, judging quiet of before, but a hushed and waiting awe. The entire council stood, their faces stripped of pride, etched instead with a humility that bordered on reverence. Lyra stood slightly apart, her own weary eyes shining with a quiet, fierce pride. The head of the council, the elder who had once looked upon her with stern disapproval, stepped forward. He did not offer praise. He offered an apology, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer contain. "We were guardians of an echo," he said, "while you learned the song of the source. The blueprints for calm are no longer a heresy. They are our hope." With those words, the last vestiges of conflict dissolved. The council's formal recognition was not just an acceptance of a new technique. It was an admission that their entire understanding of sound had been incomplete. They saw now that true power lay not in volume or complexity, but in empathy and precision. Elara accepted their acknowledgement with a deep bow, but she did not stop there. The victory was not hers alone. "If this new path is to be walked," she stated, her voice clear though tired, "then the one who first mapped it must walk it with us. I will accept this honor only if Master Lyra is reinstated among you." Her exile ended, and her wisdom welcomed home. It was not a demand, but a necessary healing, the final stitch to close an old wound. The council agreed without hesitation. The future of sound weaving was no longer a choice between tradition and innovation, but a fusion of both, made richer and more resilient by the wisdom of the blueprints. The immediate catastrophe was averted. The forest slept, but a new and greater responsibility now settled upon them all. The real work, Elara realized, was just beginning. The knowledge of how to build calm could not remain a secret held by a few. It had to be shared, taught, and woven into the very fabric of their world, so that no heart and no forest would ever have to suffer the Great Unrest again. The morning sun filtered through the canopy of the whispering grove, dappling the small group of apprentices gathered in a quiet circle. Elara stood beside Lyra, the two of them a living testament to the fusion of old and new. The air hummed with a gentle, natural harmony, a stark contrast to the silence they had once fought to break. Today, they would pass on the torch. Elara began not with a lecture, but with a question. "What do you hear when you listen to the space between the sounds?" The apprentices, young faces bright with curiosity, tilted their heads. One mentioned the rustle of leaves, another the distant trickle of the stream. A third, a quiet girl named Fenna, simply pointed to her own chest, to the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. Elara smiled. "That is your first and most important tool," she said. The foundation. Lyra then stepped forward, her hands moving in the familiar, subtle patterns. She did not weave a complex melody. She amplified the sound of Fenna's heartbeat, slowing it ever so slightly until it became a deep, resonant drum that everyone could feel in their bones. She layered over it the softest chime from a river stone, a single note that hung in the air like a promise. "This is not about creating noise," Lyra explained, her voice a soft counterpoint to the soundscape. "It is about building a sanctuary, one layer at a time." The apprentices watched mesmerized as the simple combination of rhythm and melody created a pocket of profound calm right there in the grove. Their first attempts were clumsy, as all beginnings are. One boy's foundational beat was too fast, creating a sense of urgency rather than rest. Another's melodic layer clashed with the rhythm, creating a dissonance that made a nearby squirrel scold them in annoyance. But there was no fear of failure here, only the healthy tension of learning a delicate craft. Elara moved among them, her guidance patient and precise. She did not correct their mistakes with sharp words, but with gentle redirection. For the boy with the racing rhythm, she had him place a hand on his own heart to feel its natural, resting pace. For the girl with the clashing melody, she suggested listening to the rhythm for 3 full cycles before adding a single, complementary note. The stakes of their lesson felt both immense and intimate. Each apprentice who mastered these blueprints became another guardian for the forest, a weaver who could prevent the return of the Great Unrest. This was not just a class, it was an inoculation against future despair, ensuring the grove's protection for centuries to come. As the students practiced, their individual sounds began to intertwine, creating new and beautiful variations on the foundational themes. Elara watched them, a deep sense of fulfillment warming her. But alongside that satisfaction grew a new, quiet urgency. These techniques lived in her hands and in Lyra's memory, but what if they were forgotten? The knowledge felt too precious, too vital, to exist only as oral tradition. It needed a permanent home, while the apprentices wove their first successful, collaborative soundscape, a harmony that made the very flowers around them seem to lean in closer to listen. Elara made a decision. She would write it all down, every principle, every warning, every delicate balance. She would create a guide, a permanent record of the blueprints for calm. The first drop of ink onto the parchment felt like a greater risk than facing the heart tree. Elara sat in the quiet of the grove, a blank page before her, and understood the true weight of her task. She was not just recording techniques, she was attempting to capture a whisper in a jar. How could mere words convey the felt sensation of a foundational rhythm, the ethical terror of suggestion, or the spiritual surrender required to heal a weeping willow? The conflict was no longer against an external silence, but against the limitations of language itself. With each stroke of the pen, she had to translate the music of her soul into a map others could follow. She chose not to write a dry manual of instruction. Instead, she began with the story. She wrote of Lyra in her cave, of the sleeping hornet, and the lesson of empathy. She detailed her own failure in the grove, the startled fawn that taught her to listen before she acted. The manuscript became a collaborative history, weaving Lyra's ancient wisdom with the hard-earned lessons from the heart tree's salvation. This was not just about what to do, but about why it mattered. Including every ethical warning was a sacred duty. A paragraph on the foundational rhythm was followed by a stark reminder that a beat too fast could trigger a primal flight response. A description of the melodic layer carried a cautionary tale about the unlocked doors of memory and the responsibility to avoid sharp emotional turns. The chapter on suggestion was framed by the oath she had sworn to Lyra, a vow to be a gardener of the mind, never a conqueror. The act of writing solidified her own understanding in ways she had not anticipated. Explaining a concept to an unseen reader forced her to confront its deepest truths and potential misunderstandings. She found herself simplifying complex ideas, finding the perfect analogy to make the abstract tangible. The steady rhythm was not just a beat, it was the feeling of a safe, solid floor beneath your feet. The ambient layer was not a collection of noises, but the proof that the world was keeping watch, so you did not have to. As the final word was written, a profound shift occurred within her. The weight of being the sole practitioner, the living repository of this knowledge, began to lift. It was now held safely in the pages, a legacy that could outlive her. She felt the closing of one chapter and the quiet, certain beginning of another. Her role was changing from a weaver of sounds to a guide for future weavers. The manuscript, titled simply The Blueprints for Calm, was no longer just a book. It was a seed. Its accuracy and clarity would determine if it grew into a strong, sheltering tree or a twisted, dangerous vine. The stakes for its future application were as high as any battle she had fought. But for now, in the deep quiet of the completed work, there was only the gentle hum of a purpose fulfilled and the anticipation of the voices that would one day learn to sing from its pages. The ink on the manuscript was barely dry when a stranger stumbled into the whispering grove. His skin was cracked like parched earth, his eyes hollowed by a sun that offered no warmth. He did not speak of a silencing storm or a weeping willow. He spoke of a land where sleep had become a barren field. The people of his sun-scorched home, he explained, could still close their eyes, but they could no longer dream. Their nights were an empty, starless vault, and without dreams, the inspiration to sing, to build, to heal the land itself, had withered and died. Elara listened, a cold dread settling in her stomach. The Great Unrest had been a crisis of sleep, a violent rejection of rest. This was something subtler and perhaps more insidious, a quiet theft of the soul's nourishment. It was not the same illness, but it felt like a cousin, another symptom of a world falling out of balance. The conflict that gripped her was immediate and personal. Her new school was a fragile sapling, requiring constant care and protection. To leave now felt like abandoning a child. Yet, how could she refuse a plea born from such profound emptiness? To turn away from a dying land would betray every principle in the book she had just written. The blueprints for calm were not meant to be kept safe within a forest. They were meant to be shared. She made her choice looking at Lyra, whose sharp eyes held a silent understanding. The school would be in the best hands, those of the master who had first understood the true nature of sound. The senior apprentices, now grounded in the foundational layers, were ready to steward the grove's peace. Her duty was to the wider world. The stakes were no longer local. If one culture could lose its ability to dream, then all could. This was not a single forest in peril, but the very wellspring of human creativity and resilience, threatening to run dry across the globe. As she packed her traveling satchel, she placed the manuscript at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth. The weight of the pages was a comfort and a burden. She was not just a sound weaver on a journey. She was a doctor carrying the only known cure into an unknown plague. Her tools were simple, a small drum, a few chimes, but her purpose was immense. She was walking toward a silence far deeper than any she had ever faced, a silence not of fear, but of absolute emptiness. The caravan moved like a slow river of dust and cloth across the endless sand. Elara walked beside the traders, her ears straining not against silence, but against a new enemy, monotony. The desert's song was a relentless, rasping wind and the creak of saddle leather, a rhythm that wore away at the soul rather than soothing it. Her first attempts to weave a calming soundscape were swallowed whole by the vastness. The gentle chime of a river stones was a whisper lost in a roaring gale. She realized the foundational rhythm could not be a gentle drumbeat here. It had to be something that could stand equal to the environment. Closing her eyes, she listened past the wind to the one steady pulse the desert offered, the patient, plodding footfalls of the camels. She wove that rhythm into her foundation, a slow, determined beat that did not fight the landscape, but moved with it. This was her first great lesson on the journey. The blueprints were universal, but the materials had to be local. You could not import a forest lullaby into a desert. You had to learn the sound soul of a place, its unique voice, and then help that voice find its own peace. The melody layer became the whisper of sand, shifting in a gentle dune, not the rustle of leaves. The ambient texture was the faint, cool echo of a starry night sky, a counterpoint to the searing sun. Her soundscapes began to hold, creating small, fragile oases of calm around her as they traveled. Her most eager students were the caravan guards, men and women whose faces were etched with the permanent fatigue of watchful nights. Their insomnia was not born of terror, but of a hypervigilance that refused to switch off. They were trapped in their own foundational rhythm, one set to the pace of a potential threat. Elara began to teach them not the full complexity of the art, but the power of the first layer. She showed them how to focus on their own breath, to find a rhythm slower than a walking pace, and to use that internal anchor to quiet the alarm bells in their minds. Around the evening fires, the simple, shared practice of rhythmic breathing became a new kind of watch, one that guarded their own peace. Watching a veteran guard, who had not slept deeply in years, finally surrender to a restful night was a different kind of victory than healing the heart tree. It was quieter, more personal, but it carried its own profound weight. It proved that the blueprints were not magic dependent on a sacred grove. They were a fundamental human technology for peace, adaptable to any heart in any landscape. This success was a quiet flame of confidence in the face of the immense silence that lay ahead. As the endless dunes began to rise into weathered sandstone cliffs, the very air changed. The constant wind faded, not into peace, but into a deadened stillness. The desert's monotony had been a noise, but this new quiet was an absence so profound it felt heavy. Ahead, nestled between the cliffs, lay the dreamless city, and Elara felt its emptiness long before she saw its walls. The city walls were not built of sandstone, but carved from the very mountain itself, their surfaces smooth and silent as a windless night. Elara passed through the gate and felt the change instantly. It was not a loud oppression, like the Great Unrest, but a suffocating quiet, as if the city itself was holding a breath it had forgotten how to release. The people moved with a precise, weary efficiency, their footsteps making no sound on the polished stone streets. Their faces were not twisted in agony, but smoothed into masks of profound resignation. their eyes holding a flat, hollow light. They functioned, they worked, they lived, but the vibrant hum of inner life was gone. The very stones beneath her feet seemed to drink the sound from the air, leaving a vacuum where hope should have been. Her arrival did not go unnoticed. The city's elders, their robes the color of dust, received her in a chamber that amplified nothing. When she spoke of dreams, of restoring the color and music of the night, their skepticism was a wall as solid as the mountain around them. "You speak of phantoms," one elder stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "We have peace here, we have order. What need have we for the chaotic visions of sleep?" Their distrust was a defense mechanism. To yearn for something you cannot remember is a special kind of pain, and they had long ago sealed that particular wound shut. The conflict was no longer about magic, but about convincing a people that their profound exhaustion was not a state of peace, but a slow death. Faced with this impenetrable collective doubt, Elara made a critical decision. She would not ask for the city. She asked for a single soul. She requested to work with someone who had never known a dream, a child whose mind was a blank slate, unburdened by the memory of loss. The elders, perhaps out of a flicker of clinical curiosity, agreed. They brought her a young girl named Lyra, whose eyes were as clear and empty as the desert sky. Winning her trust was the first, fragile thread. If Elara could prove that a dream was not a phantom of chaos, but a seed of life, then she might have a chance with the rest. But if she failed here, if she could not spark a single flicker in that darkness, the elders would see her not as a healer, but as a dangerous fraud, and she would be cast back into the sands. Her mission, a complete failure. The fate of the entire city rested on the quiet hour she would spend with one small, silent child. That night, in a small, circular room, Elara sat with Lyra. The air was still and heavy. The child watched her with a calm, unnerving patience. Elara did not bring out her drum or her chimes. She knew that any external sound would be swallowed by the hungry silence of the stone. Instead, she began with the most fundamental layer of all, the one that required no tools but her own presence. She matched her breathing to the child's, a slow, steady rhythm in the dark. She was not here to impose a dream from the outside. She was here to listen for the whisper of a dream waiting to be born. The air in the small room was a held breath. Elara watched the steady rise and fall of Lyra's chest, a rhythm not of sleep, but of waiting. She knew the city's profound silence would devour any sound she tried to impose. So she began not with music, but with memory. She closed her eyes and recalled the patient rhythm of the caravan, the slow, hypnotic shift of sand dunes under a boundless sky. She wove this into the foundation, a deep, granular pulse that felt not like an intruder, but like the land's own forgotten heartbeat. It was a rhythm of immense patience, of time measured in millennia, not minutes. Over this, she layered a melody she had learned from a rare night-blooming flower in the desert, a single, pure note that held the cool promise of evening. This was not a forest lullaby, it was a desert's own whispered song. Finally, with the lightest touch of her will, she threaded a suggestion into the weave. It was not a command to dream, but a gentle permission to be curious, a feeling that the vast, empty landscape of the child's mind was a safe place to explore. The tension in the room was a physical weight. Lyora's parents stood rigid by the door, their faces a battlefield where a fragile, desperate hope fought a lifetime of armored disappointment. The city elders observed with cold, analytical eyes, ready to dismiss any flicker of success as a trick. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The child's breathing remained the same measured pace. Then, a subtle change. The tightness around Lyora's eyes softened. Her small hands, which had been clasped tightly, relaxed open on the blanket. Her breathing deepened, slipping from conscious imitation into the true, slow rhythm of restorative sleep. A quiet sigh escaped her, a sound of relief so profound it seemed to warm the cold stone of the room. She was dreaming. Inside that sleep, a simple, beautiful vision unfolded. Lyra was flying, not through a chaotic storm of images, but over a cool, welcoming oasis. She felt the gentle brush of night air against her skin and saw the silver reflection of moons on water far below. It was a dream of freedom and peace, the soul's first tentative sip of water after a long thirst. When she awoke, the change was not just in her body, but in her eyes. The hollow flatness was gone, replaced by a luminous wonder. She looked at her parents and spoke not of phantoms, but of a joyful memory. "I was flying," she said, her voice clear and bright in the silent room. The air was cool. The words landed not as a statement, but as a revolution. The elder's skepticism shattered against the simple, undeniable truth shining in the child's face. The news did not simply travel through the city. It seeped into the stone, a vibration of possibility that could not be contained. By the next evening, the city's main square, a place designed for silent congregation, was filled with a new sound, the hushed, hopeful murmur of hundreds of voices, all waiting for the woman who could return the stars to their night. The silence of the city was a physical weight, but the hope in the central oasis was a fragile, growing flame. Elara stood at the water's edge, watching as thousands of the Dreamless filed into the vast space. To heal them individually would take lifetimes she did not have. The only path forward was a tapestry of sound, woven on a scale no sound weaver had ever dared, a single lullaby for an entire civilization. She had spent days preparing, simplifying the blueprints to their most profound essence. The foundation would be the shared rhythm of their own breathing, guided by her core pulse. The melody would be a single, sustained note of pure potential, the sound of a star being born in the quiet of space. The suggestion would be stripped of all complexity, carrying only one intention: permission to remember. The city's elders, their skepticism replaced by a solemn determination, positioned themselves at key points around the oasis. Her caravan students stood among the crowd, their own practiced calm acting as anchor points to stabilize the immense weave. They were not just assistants, they were the pillars of a sanctuary they were building together. The risk was terrifying. A soundscape this large was a delicate structure. If her focus wavered for even a second, if one of the anchor points faltered, the entire construct could collapse into a wave of psychic dissonance. Instead of bringing dreams, such a failure would cement the population's despair, proving that their emptiness was a permanent state. It would be a final, crushing silence from which they might never recover, but to do nothing was to accept that same fate. As the last sliver of sun vanished behind the cliffs, Elara closed her eyes. She did not begin with a grand gesture. She began with a breath, She drew air into her lungs, slow and deep, and as she exhaled, she released the foundational rhythm, a vibration so low it was felt rather than heard, a tremor passing through the stone beneath their feet and resonating in the chest of every person present. She felt the strain immediately, a vastness pulling at the edges of her consciousness, threatening to tear her weave apart. Then, one by one, she felt the anchors hold. The elders, the guards, her students, they focused their will, reinforcing the foundation, creating a stable grid of calm across the oasis. Empowered by their support, she introduced the melodic layer, a clear tone that hung in the air like a new moon. Finally, she wove the thread of suggestion, a gentle question sent into the collective mind of the city. What does peace feel like? For a long moment, there was only the weave itself, a beautiful, intricate structure hanging over a silent crowd. Then, a woman near the water gasped, her hand flying to her heart. A man let out a soft, shuddering sob of recognition. Like a field of dormant seeds responding to a long-awaited rain, the people of the city began, one by one, to remember how to dream. The grand weave settled over the city like a blanket woven from the fabric of the night itself. Elara stood at its center, her consciousness stretched across thousands of sleeping minds. She felt the immense weight of the soundscape, a delicate architecture of rhythm and resonance that required every ounce of her focus to maintain. It was not a static thing, but a living, breathing entity that shifted with the collective unconscious of the dreamers. A spike of anxiety from a merchant reliving a lost trade route required her to soften the melodic layer into a gentle reassurance. The joyful flight of a child's first dream needed a brighter harmonic thread to encourage its growth. Her anchors, the elders and her students, held their positions, their own calm focus feeding into the weave, creating a stable net beneath her soaring creation. She poured into it not just her skill, but the memory of the heart tree's surrender, the trust of the badger, and the hopeful light in Lyora's eyes. This was more than magic. It was an act of profound giving. The only sound in the oasis was the soft, synchronized breathing of the slumbering multitude, a rhythm deeper and more powerful than any drum. As the hours stretched on, the strain became a physical ache in her bones, a draining fatigue that threatened to unravel the entire tapestry. Her own desire for sleep was a constant whisper in the back of her mind, but she anchored herself to the peace she was crafting for others, using their rest as her own fuel. The future of the city, its capacity for song and story and love, was being rewoven in this single, silent night. Then, the first hint of pearl gray light touched the eastern cliffs. Elara did not end the soundscape abruptly. She began a gradual, gentle dissolution, allowing the foundational rhythm to slow even further, the melodic notes to stretch and soften like distant echoes. The suggestion of peace became a quiet blessing left imprinted on the air. As the weave faded, the natural sounds of the waking world began to filter back in, not as an intrusion, but as a welcome melody. The city stirred, not with the weary resignation of before, but with the slow, contented movements of people emerging from a deep and nourishing rest. Eyes opened, and they were no longer hollow. They held the soft, luminous glow of those who have journeyed far in the night and returned home, transformed. Sunlight did not just illuminate the city that morning, it revealed it anew. The weary resignation that had smoothed every face like worn stone was gone, replaced by a vibrant, restless energy. People did not simply go about their tasks. They moved with a purpose that seemed to hum in the very air. An old woman who had spent years weaving identical gray cloth was suddenly mixing dyes and colors no one had seen for generations, her fingers trembling not with fatigue, but with excitement. A man who had been a silent stonemason was now carving intricate stories into the walls, his chisel singing a rhythm of creation. The city, once a monument to silence, was now a chorus of awakening. The restoration of dreams had unlocked a wellspring of creativity that was already beginning to heal the physical world. The conflict was over, not with a battle, but with a gentle exhalation of collective relief. The city elders, their stern faces softened by a wonder they no longer tried to hide, approached Elara. They did not offer gold or titles. Instead, they declared the first annual Festival of Dreams, a day to celebrate the night's gifts and the woman who had returned them. It was a declaration of a new identity, a city reborn not through conquest, but through rest. Watching the joyous activity, Elara felt the pull of her forest home, a deep and persistent call. But she also saw the fragility of this new piece. The blueprints for calm were not a one-time spell. They were a practice, a discipline that needed guardians. Her mission would be a hollow victory if the city's dreams faded again with her departure. She made her choice. She would stay for a season, long enough to teach a small, dedicated group the principles of the soundscape. She would show them how to listen for the first signs of dissonance, how to weave the foundational rhythms that would keep their nights fertile. The successful healing of this desert city proved something monumental. Her methods were not bound to the magic of the Whispering Grove. They were a universal language of peace, a set of tools that could mend any community suffering from the silent famine of sleeplessness. As the weeks turned to months, her students grew confident, their own weaves strengthening the city's nights. When the first autumn winds began to whisper through the mountain passes, carrying the scent of distant pine, Elara knew her work there was complete. Her students were capable, the city was thriving, and the call of home had become a song she could no longer ignore. With her pack lighter, but her purpose heavier than ever, she prepared for the long journey back, her mission truly accomplished. The scent of pine and damp earth was a welcome embrace after the dry desert air. Elara walked the familiar path to the Whispering Grove, and the sound that greeted her was not the profound silence she had once healed, but a vibrant, living harmony. Her school had blossomed in her absence. Under Lyra's guidance, the grove itself had been reshaped with a gentle, knowing touch. Clearings were now dedicated to specific arts, a small amphitheater for foundational rhythms, a circle of hanging stones for melodic exploration, a soft, mossy hollow for the study of ambient textures. It was a living campus, a testament to the blueprints made real. Her manuscript was not locked away as a relic, but was open on a reading stand, its pages softly illuminated by captured sunlight, surrounded by apprentices discussing a passage on harmonic resonance. The most profound change, however, was in the soundscapes themselves. The students were not just replicating her work, they were building upon it. One weaver was blending the chime of frost-touched leaves with a rhythm inspired by a badger's hibernation breath, creating a soundscape of deep winter calm. Another was experimenting with layered suggestions, not for sleep, but for focused creativity. The school was no longer just a place of preservation, it was a crucible of innovation. Elara felt no jealousy, only a deep, swelling pride. The lone heroine was no longer needed. Her greatest success was that she had made herself redundant. She did not reclaim a throne, but simply took her place beside Lyra, her mentor, and now her partner. Their leadership was a shared melody, Lyra's ancient wisdom, a steady bass note, to Elara's newer, broader experiences. Together, they guided not as commanders, but as senior members of a growing fellowship. Word of the school's success had traveled on the wind, carried by traders and former students. Seekers now arrived from distant shores and mountain kingdoms, not pleading for a miracle, but asking to learn the craft. The grove had become a beacon, and each new student was a spark, destined to carry the light of calm back to their own corner of the world. The knowledge was no longer a secret held by a few. It was a river beginning to flow. One evening, as the sky turned to violet, Elara sat with Lyra on a bench of ancient root, listening to the overlapping practice weaves of a dozen apprentices. The air was thick with a beautiful, complex tapestry of peace. In that quiet moment, Elara's mind traveled back to the very beginning, to the cool, smooth weight of a single moon-blessed river stone in her desperate hand. That one small choice, that first act of faith, had rippled outward in ways she could never have imagined, quieting not just a forest, but building the foundation for a quieter world. The seasons turned not in years, but in generations of students. Elara, now a grand weaver with hair the color of winter moonbeams, felt the grove's harmony as her own heartbeat. She no longer stood at the forefront of every crisis, for the blueprints had been woven into the fabric of many lands. The true test of any system, however, is not how it functions under its creator's hand, but how it endures in their absence. That test arrived not with a scream, but with a slow, creeping silence from the distant cerulean deeps. A messenger from the ocean realm arrived not with panic, but with a profound sorrow. A strange blight was spreading through the coral kingdoms, not killing the life, but leeching the sound from it. The great reefs, once vibrant with the clicks and whistles of countless creatures, were falling into an unnerving hush. The very water was growing heavy with a grief no one could name. The elders of the Mer Kingdom, having heard whispers of the forest weavers, sent a plea for aid. Elara received the message in the heart of the grove, surrounded by her most advanced students, including seasoned masters from the desert city. They expected her to lead them, to weave a grand soundscape, as she had for the heart tree. But she remained seated, her hands resting calmly in her lap. The crisis in the ocean was not hers to solve, she told them. It was theirs. You carry the same maps I do, she said, her voice calm but firm. The Leviathan of the deep does not need my song. It needs a new one, born from your own understanding. Her task was not to command, but to guide from afar. She gifted them a scrying pool, a basin of still water that would reflect their progress, and sent them on their journey. The true work began as her students, a diverse chorus of forest and desert weavers, stood on the shores of the silent sea. Their first challenge was not creation, but diagnosis. How do you listen to a sickness that lives in the water? They waded into the shallows, their own foundational rhythms faltering against the oppressive quiet. The usual sounds of lapping waves and skittering crabs were absent, replaced by a muffled, mournful pressure. It was a young weaver from the desert, accustomed to listening for the faintest whisper in vast emptiness, who first heard the truth. The silence was not empty, it was shaped. It had a rhythm, a slow, pained cadence that resonated through the water like a dirge. They followed this sorrowful pulse for leagues, until the sea floor dropped away into an abyssal trench. And there, coiled around a spire of cold black rock, they found the source. It was not a monster, but a being of immense ancient sorrow, a sea leviathan, whose scales had once shimmered with the light of fallen stars. Now they were dull, and from its massive form emanated the blight of silence. It was grieving, its heart broken by a loss so profound that its sorrow was leaching the music from the ocean itself. The students could not use the sound of rustling leaves or shifting sands here. They had to build their sanctuary from the ocean's own forgotten voice. Their foundational rhythm became the slow, powerful pulse of the deep ocean currents, a force as patient and immense as the Leviathan's grief. Over this, they wove a melodic layer, crafted from the fragmented songs of the great whales, piecing together a haunting, beautiful melody of remembrance. The ambient texture was the gentle, crushing pressure of the abyss, a feeling of being held and understood. Finally, they faced the most delicate task, the suggestion. They could not suggest happiness or forgetfulness. Such a lie would be rejected instantly. Instead, after days of listening to the shape of its pain, they wove a single, powerful thread of permission, a feeling that it was allowed to release its hold on the loss, that its love could continue as a quiet song in the deep, rather than a scream of anguish. In the whispering grove, Elara watched all this unfold in the scrying pool, her own breath held. She saw her students argue, then collaborate. She saw them fail, then adapt. She saw the moment their disparate weaves from two different worlds finally synchronized into a single, oceanic lullaby. The climactic moment was not a battle. It was a surrender. The Leviathan's massive body, which had been taut with sorrow, slowly relaxed. A deep, shuddering sigh passed through the water, a sound that carried not pain, but an immeasurable relief. As the creature slipped into its first peaceful sleep in centuries, the blight of silence began to recede. Faintly at first, then in a rising tide, the clicks, pops, and songs of the reef returned, the ocean's voice restored by a chorus of healers who had never needed their master to speak. A single tear traced a path down Elara's lined cheek, not for the victory, but for the beautiful, undeniable truth it represented. The blueprint was no longer a document. It was a living, breathing, self-sustaining force.